Welcome to Insights into the Industrial Revolution. In this fourth video in the series, I cover the rise of the factory system of mass production. In the early years of the Industrial Revolution, it was the textile industry that developed the factory system, and this is where we'll start. Richard Arkwright. Richard Arkwright was one of the world's first entrepreneurs. He was an inventor, but more importantly, he knew how to take ideas, improve them, and then successfully promote them in the marketplace. It made him immensely rich, although not popular with his business partners. Arkwright started his working life as a barber and wig maker in Bolton in the 1760s. He invented a waterproof dye for wigs, and the income from his patent funded his move into textiles. In 1768, he teamed up with a technician called John Kay and created a spinning machine. Arkwright patented the spinning frame in 1769 without mentioning Kay in the patent. Unsurprisingly, the two fell out, and legal battles would later arise. Arkwright's spinning machine was originally powered by horses, and he set up a factory in Nottingham with some business partners in 1770. Richard Arkwright realised that water power would be much more efficient and converted his spinning machine to water power. This is the water frame. Arkwright's water frame could spin 96 threads at a time and was easier to operate and much faster than any other spinning machine at that time. To expand his business, Arkwright needed a plentiful supply of water to power the machines, and he chose the small village of Cromford in Derbyshire for his new factory. Richard Arkwright built the world's first water-powered mill at Cromford in Derbyshire in 1771. 200 people were employed there. A carding machine had been invented in 1748. Carding is the process of converting raw cotton to a continuous skein prior to spinning. Richard Arkwright improved on the original ideas, and he took out a patent for the new carding engine in 1775. Arkwright then built a larger mill in Cromford in 1776 that combined carding and spinning. At its peak, the factory employed 1,100 people, with around two-thirds of them children. At Cromford, Richard Arkwright built cottages for his workers and a public house, and he instigated disciplined working conditions for his employees. The factory ran on two 13-hour shifts. Bells rang at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. to notify workers on the next shift, and the factory gates shut at precisely 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Any workers who missed their time lost their day's pay and incurred a fine. Generously for the time, he allowed his workers 1 week's holiday a year, but they were not allowed to travel outside the town. Arkwright was an astute businessman, and he knew how to sell. Many other businesses bought his water frame, and Arkwright himself built at least 5 other factories, including the famous village at New Lanark in Scotland, in partnership with David Dale. In 1777, Richard Arkwright installed the first steam engine to be used in a cotton mill at another mill in Derbyshire. However, this engine was used to maintain the level of the mill pond that was used to feed the water mill that drove the machinery. It was not used to power the machinery directly. But Richard Arkwright was aggressive and domineering. He sidelined some of his business partners and bought out others. In 1785, John Kay and others brought a case against him, arguing that Arkwright was not the exclusive inventor of the spinning frame and should not have the exclusive patent. Arkwright's patents were annulled, but by that time Arkwright was rich and powerful and dominated the textile market. His wealth or success were not greatly diminished by the loss of the patent. Richard Arkwright died in 1792 at the age of 59. The factory system. Richard Arkwright is often cited as the father of the factory system because of the huge mills he built, first at Cromford and then elsewhere. In a sense, he was the first modern capitalist, and his business methods spread the concept of mass production in large factories. Arkwright was a great publicist and a brilliant marketeer, but his wasn't the first factory. That credit probably goes to John and Thomas Lom. John Lom was the younger brother of Thomas Lom, a silk merchant. At that time, Italy was the world centre for silk textile manufacture, and Thomas sent John out to Italy to learn their secrets. John Lom brought ideas, some Italian craftsmen, and probably designs for silk spinning machines back, and in 1718 Thomas Lom was granted a patent for machines to wind, spin and twist raw silk. John Lom then designed a factory to house the machines, and it was built near Derby, opening in 1721. Lom's mill was the first mechanised factory in the world. This is where the factory system started, and the spinning machines were powered by water, and the mill employed up to 300 people. The mill was 5 stories high and housed 8 spinning machines and 4 twisting machines on the lower floors, with 26 winding machines on the upper floors. Working silk requires hot, humid conditions, and in the 1730s a steam engine was used to pump hot, wet air around the mill. Working in such conditions was not pleasant, and an employee in the late 1730s or early 1740s described long hours, low wages and beatings. John Lom sadly died in 1722, and Thomas took over the management of the factory. He died in 1739, and the factory was sold. Nevertheless, silk production continued at the mill until around 1865, when the silk industry in Great Britain declined in the face of foreign competition. The factory had various other uses until 1910, when it was partially destroyed by fire. Restored, the building now houses Derby Industrial Museum, called the Museum of Making. Richard Arkwright used his marketing skill to popularise the factory system for producing textiles, but the credit for the first factory lies with John and Thomas Lom, 50 years earlier. David Dale. Samuel Crompton took ideas from James Hargreaves' spinning jenny and from Richard Arkwright's water frame and invented the spinning mule in 1779. Crompton's spinning mule was manually operated and had 48 spindles, producing around 1 pound of thread per day. The thread was of such high quality that it sold for 3 times the price of hand-spun thread. Samuel Crompton couldn't afford to patent his invention, and he sold the rights to David Dale, who did patent it and profited it handsomely. David Dale was born in Ayrshire, in Scotland, in 1739. His family were humble farmers and traders. He was apprenticed to a weaver in Paisley and became involved in the textile trade, setting up business in Glasgow in the 1760s, importing yarns from Europe. His business thrived, and by 1777 he was very wealthy. In 1783 he set up the first Glasgow branch of the Royal Bank of Scotland. In 1784, David Dale hosted Richard Arkwright on his visit to Scotland, and they created a partnership to build a cotton mill at New Lanark, about 30 miles down the River Clyde from Glasgow. It was around this time that David Dale took over Samuel Crompton's licence for the spinning mule. The mill at New Lanark opened in 1786. Richard Arkwright and another partner then withdrew from the venture, leaving David Dale the sole owner. The mill employed 1,400 people and provided housing for its workers and education for their children. It became a famous model community, attracting visitors from all over the world. At New Lanark, business, philanthropy and education all came together for the first time anywhere in Britain. The working and social conditions provided at New Lanark were in advance of anything else provided in Britain at the time. In 1799, the textile entrepreneur Robert Owen married David Dale's daughter Anne Caroline. Robert Owen bought New Lanark Mill from David Dale at that time, and there he implemented further improvements to workers' lives, including improved education and childcare. He implemented an 8-hour working day in 1810. Robert Owen sold his share of New Lanark in 1828, but continued to campaign for improved workers' conditions, child education and social change. He is sometimes credited with coining the term socialism. He campaigned for social change and the rights of workers until his death in 1858, and his ideas influenced the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. David Dale continued in the textile industry, opening other mills and dye works. He also set up an insurance company, and he devoted much of his time and wealth to philanthropic works, and he was instrumental in the building of the Glasgow Royal Infirmary in 1795. David Dale was friends with many of Glasgow's wealthy businessmen, men who owed their fortunes to slavery. Indeed, the raw cotton used in Dale's mills, and in every other mill in Britain, was harvested in America using slave labour. Nevertheless, Dale was one of the early campaigners for the abolition of slavery. He was the first chair of the Glasgow Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, established in 1791, and invested in an enterprise designed to help freed slaves. David Dale took a public stand against slavery when many of his fellow entrepreneurs failed to. David Dale died in 1806, one of the most important reformers of the industrial age. The factory system develops. Edmund Cartwright patented the first power loom in 1789. However, it was not commercially successful, and he seems to have gone bankrupt in 1793, although he was awarded a pension for his invention by Parliament in 1809. It was Richard Roberts who invented the first commercially successful power loom in 1822. These drove the growth of the textile industry. In 1800, there were around 2,400 looms in operation in the UK, and most of these were hand looms. By 1835, there were around 100,000 looms, mostly water or steam powered. By 1850, there were approximately 250,000 looms in operation in the UK, and by 1870, there were 400,000 looms. By 1900, although there were 600,000 looms, more than half of them in Lancashire, the industry had begun to decline. Competition from the United States, Germany and India was rapidly increasing, and their technology was more advanced. World War I resulted in a catastrophic loss of demand, with many workers conscripted for war service. The British textile industry never recovered. However, the UK remains a leader in technical fabrics for specialist applications and in luxury fabrics for the fashion industry. Around 100,000 people are still employed in the textile industry in the UK, although this compares with 1 million in the early 1900s. As an interesting side note, Richard Roberts, who developed the power loom, became a partner in the firm of Sharp, Roberts and Company in 1826. By 1833, the company was building steam locomotives. Roberts left the firm in 1843, and the new company, Sharp, Stewart and Company, would become one of the largest manufacturers of steam locomotives in the world in the second half of the 19th century, based at the famous Atlas Works at St Rollox in Glasgow. J&P Coats. Many textile companies emerged in the early 19th century as the technology advanced. One of these was J&P Coats. In 1802, James Coates set up his own weaving business in Paisley in Scotland. By 1826, he was wealthy enough to open his own cotton mill on the outskirts of Paisley. When he retired, his sons James and Peter set up J&P Coats Limited. In 1806, also in Paisley, Patrick Clark invented a way of twisting cotton into a substitute for silk. He opened a thread factory in 1812. Both businesses prospered, and both expanded into North America. In 1890, J&P Coats was listed on the London Stock Exchange. By that time it had 50,000 employees. In 1896, J&P Coats merged with Clark and Company. The combined company's Anchor Mill complex in Paisley was the largest thread works in the world. By 1912, J&P Coats was one of the largest companies in the world, with only US Steel and Standard Oil larger. J&P Coats continued to expand globally during the first half of the 20th century, in spite of the decline in the British textile industry. However, the second half of the century proved more difficult. The company went through a series of mergers from the 1950s, becoming Coats Payton in 1961 and then Coats Viella in 1986. The company was refinanced and restructured as Coats Group plc in 2015 and now specialises in high-performance yarns and fabrics, including carbon composites, as well as software for the textile industry and waterless dyeing. Coats is an example of the factory system in operation, one that has evolved with the changing times. It became the largest textile manufacturer in the world in the 19th century and weathered 2 world wars and the Depression in the 20th century to re-emerge greatly reduced in size but still performing well as a niche manufacturer and service provider in the textile industry. It is perhaps unusual as one of the giants of the Industrial Revolution that did survive to the present day, even if greatly changed in form. And I believe we must salute it for that achievement, since most of the other greats of the 19th century did not survive. Thank you for watching this brief history of the factory system. Goodbye.